Hmm.
Hi, Lorraine.
Hey, hi Hazel.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Although it's really not
Good
that
to be
serious,
here.
it's definitely just a chat with me. Um,
Sounds good.
yeah, so I don't know, maybe we could just get started because I think, most of the listeners listening are climbers, and you've done a bit of climbing, right? Is that right or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah,
I-
you do quite a bit of climbing actually. I remember. Yeah.
In my 20s, I was massively into climbing. And
Okay.
then I just got more and more serious with my skiing. And I spent all my summers like in South America or in New Zealand. So climbing kind of fell a little bit by the wayside. And now I'm fully into surfing in the summers. So I miss it though. I really I haven't been able to replace it with surfing or with other activities. So my intention is to get back into it when I have
Nice.
the chance.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we probably are going to focus a bit more on your skiing though, because I guess that's been your main sport, and it was what, yeah, I guess you focused your athletic career on, right? And more
Yeah.
specifically free ride skiing. So I don't know, maybe
Mhm.
you want to start by just like giving us a bit of an overview of what your career looked like as a free ride skier, and then we're going to get into more of the like psychology and flow and mindset stuff.
Mhm. So my career was unusual in the way that I didn't have a background in alpine ski racing or like freestyle skiing like most of the top athletes have. That's because I moved to Australia when I was 8 years old and I lived there for 10 years and I didn't ski in Australia. So I just skied recreationally about 5 weeks a year when I came back to Austria to visit my dad. So we grew up in a village called Lech am Arlberg, which is part of the largest ski area in Austria. And it's like an absolutely incredible, I think, easily one of the top three ski areas in the world. So I was just lucky enough to be able to join ski school and ski there. So I had a very grassroots kind of background. And then I became a ski instructor like my dad, wanted to follow in his footsteps. I did that next to university. And yeah, kind of one thing led to the other. I started my own guiding business at 23, started offering free ride camps. And that's when my friends were like, Lorraine, you should really go to a free ride contest because you're really good at skiing off piste. I was like, oh, I'll give it a go. So it was very unintentional, actually. And then I did my first contest, got some sponsorship just with equipment. And I didn't really get into serious competition until I was fairly old. Compared to now, like the juniors are coming in to the highest level of competition, like at the age of 18, which is incredible. That's when I started this type of skiing. Obviously, not skiing, but that's when I started freeride skiing. So I was 28 when I started in earnest with the comps because really before that, there wasn't really too much around. So I was pretty much at the very beginning of the whole freeride scene. I think I was the first, easily one of the first females in Austria to do it professionally as well. So it was all very new and wild, wild west and quite an organic and gradual process. And then it took me about 10 years to figure out this competition thing. Um, and I became world champion at 37.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how many years
so,
ago was that?
so I'm 42 now. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's, yeah, time's flying. I stopped competing after the 2018 season. So I did one more season after my world championship season. And since then, I've been focusing more on filming and on my camps and just working together with my sponsors in product development and content creation and that kind of thing. Yeah. So my career's definitely evolved and also like seeing it evolve from where it was important to get magazine covers to now where it's all about social media. Like that's also quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, have you adapted to the new world?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, technologically, I feel like I'm pretty, like, I'm really interested in that stuff. I design my own website and all that. I feel pretty well equipped for that stuff. But yeah, it has positives and negatives because on the one hand, the whole social media gives you more power, more control over how you want to present yourself, as opposed to hoping for that magazine cover or hoping to get into that film part, which you need the right sponsors for because they're the ones who are funding all that. So it gives you more control, which I think is something really positive.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I guess, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I found that myself as well. And that's how, I feel like many pro athletes now are not even going to need sponsors, because they'll just have their own YouTube accounts
Mm-hmm.
and they'll just make money through YouTube or whatever. So it's really like you're not
Yeah.
even dependent on sponsors anymore, I don't think. I don't know.
Gosh, I mean, I I'm not sure if that would be kind of an extreme case, because if that's the case, then you're really first and foremost a content creator. And if you want to focus fully on your sport as an athlete, that's a full-time job. So if you're
Yeah.
also creating all this content and especially having a YouTube channel, it is so much work because you have to be publishing a new video once a week if you really want to earn money off it.
Mm,
That's a tough call to do that next to being a professional athlete. And that's kind of the issue I'm seeing as well with influencers who are in direct, like athletes nowadays are in direct competition with influencers
mm,
in terms of where budget is going. And I think yeah, it's hard because as an athlete, you do have to be focused on your training and on your, regeneration and all the contests and the traveling. And it's not your full focus to be really good at this app and to make photos. It's not.
yeah. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
guess like maybe the most efficient thing is like to have a team around you who kind of like does the photo and the video and make you sort of like you're in the content, but you're not necessarily creating the content. I've seen some quite
Mm-hmm.
good like collaborations in climbing with that sort of thing. But yeah, it is interesting for sure. This idea of athletes competing with influencers. And I guess it's kind of a balance, isn't it? Because what's the value in an athlete if they don't share any of their learning or any of their
Mm-hmm.
talent with the rest of the world, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
what's that value? Obviously, there's value in it for them and like maybe for humanity. But if you're a brand and you want to sponsor someone, I guess you have to sort of share part of your journey, don't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
And there are athletes like myself where competition was a big focus. Like for 10 years, it really was the Freo World Tour. That's where I got so much motivation and drive for my training. I knew, okay, these are the 5 events that I want to be like super fit for. I geared all my training towards that. My sponsors were very understanding in terms of if I was busy with that, then they understood that. So it depends where you have your focus, but you're absolutely right. You like offering value to your sponsors is the essential core of working with sponsors. And I think a lot of athletes kind of approach it a little bit more from, well, what's in it for me? And, what can I get out of this? As opposed to really thinking first and foremost, okay, how can I create value for this brand? How do we match? How do our values, align with each other?
Yeah,
So,
interesting. Well, I don't want to get too deep into to social media. I'd rather talk about your skiing. Um,
yeah, sure.
I think it would be cool to chat, you know, like tell us what's involved in a free ride World Cup
Hmm.
competition, because I think that will get us started with talking to you a bit about, like how you manage your psychology, because
Hmm.
it's not a standard competition, right? There's lots of variables. It's not like running the 100 meters or something. Um, so yeah, tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Hazel. So I think like there's so much uncertainty in competing at a freeride world tour stop. So the for your listeners, like the freeride world tour is the highest level of competition in freeriding. So we're talking about off-piste skiing and snowboarding, which takes place in completely natural terrain. Like there are no man-made objects or jumps or anything like that. So basically, the venue will be a peak, a mountain. Usually the start is at the very top and then the finish will be at the bottom. And you can basically do whatever you want in between the start and the finish. That's why it's a very creative process.
Do you have a
So what
time frame? You have to do it at a certain time, or does that not
mm,
come into it at all?
not
It's usually pretty fast, I suppose.
really. Yeah, like so you're judged on one of the things you're judged on is how fluid you navigate through the terrain. So it is usually a 1 minute run or 1.5 minute run, but you're not like stopped for time per se in the way that that might flow into your overall score like an alpine racer, because that's what most people think, that it's about trying to get down the mountain the
Mm,
fastest, but it's actually trying to um, show the audience and the judges the most creative way of skiing down this mountain. And as you're skiing down, you're incorporating jumps over natural features, like over cliffs and over like crests, for example, or whatever you can find, and linking the features together with awesome turns and making it look effortless and like beautiful. So for me, it's more of an art form kind of, and
yeah,
it's
so it's
very
almost like
subjective.
gymnastics meets mountain sports or something. Or because I guess it
Maybe
is a
more figure
performance,
skating.
right? Okay,
I
yeah.
think more figure skating because gymnastics has very particular moves. So
Mm,
this is more like ballet or figure skating, maybe. And the judging is similar to figure skating in that it's very subjective. Like some
mm,
judges might be really impressed with something, and others are like, oh, yeah. So, you're judged on how creative and difficult your line choice is, how aggressively you ski, how fluid you are, your technique in the air and like doing the jumps and landings and that kind of thing, and also your control. So that's obviously important. So you want to master the line that you've chosen. You don't want to choose something and then be like just barely able to pull it off, and you may be like half crashing in the landing, or like you want to do it with a lot of style and mastery, ideally, because then the judges get the impression, oh, wow, she's really got this. And she's clearly studied the terrain and knows exactly where she is, because the orientation is a major thing. So, what you need to understand is that we don't get any practice runs.
mm,
We usually don't even get to stand at the top during inspection. So usually we inspect 2 days before the competition, maybe a day before, from opposite. And then if you can, you get like a view from the side or from the bottom. Usually we don't go up the top because it's a big hike and it just takes too much energy. So you want to be conserving energy leading up to the event. But basically, it's a complete mental game. So you have to be able to, after you've decided what line you want to take, you invert that picture in your mind and
mm,
visualize yourself skiing that line as it would look like from your perspective from the top. And that took me ages to learn. It took me, that for me was the hardest thing, was actually to um, know where I was and to be able to visualize the terrain without ever having skied that terrain before.
yeah, that sounds
Mm-hmm.
really hard. I mean, you
Yeah,
must, it's almost like yeah, like the exercise in visualization is like such a big part of it. It's like you could be a really good skier, but if you weren't good at that visualization, you just wouldn't be good at the competition.
exactly.
Well, that's
Totally.
interesting. I never thought of
Yeah.
that. Wow. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's a little bit similar to climbing
Mm-hmm.
competitions in the sense that you don't get to practice the route first, and you have to
Yeah.
um look at the holds from the ground, but it's different in the sense that you're looking at it at least in the same angle. It's obviously a
Yeah.
distance, but you don't have to invert it like you do
Mm-hmm.
if you're skiing, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like on-site climbing, except, well, nowadays they actually do provide athletes with drone footage.
Okay.
That's changed the game a little bit, I feel like,
Right.
because now you don't have to do the inversion or don't have to be as good with the inversion. And actually some of the more veteran athletes were against
Right.
introducing drone footage because it really is a skill to be able to do that. And they were like, oh, we've built this skill over years.
Yeah,
It
okay.
gives us an advantage if now all athletes get provided with drone footage. It kind of makes that skill a little bit redundant. So that was a controversial issue, and it's understandable because it does change the game, and it is a skill that I had to work for years on to be able to master. Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, so there's obviously a lot of psychological challenges with with this sort of competition. What do you think is the most challenging aspect of it?
Mm. Um, I think, I mean, I would say that is it.
Okay, yeah.
Dealing with how uncertain the whole challenge is. Like, let's compare it to a gymnastics routine or something. Like, the environment where you're going to perform your routine, it changes a little bit, but it's not going to change very much. Whereas the environment here is it's like there are so many unknowns. So obviously you have to select a line so that you're not risking too much, right? But even things like judging snowpack, judging what's the quality of the snow going to be like in the landing? Like it is an educated guess. You don't 100% know what that landing is going to feel like, or if there are perhaps some hidden rocks underneath, or um yeah, there are so many unknowns. So I think dealing with the uncertainty is mentally the most challenging thing because we're talking about an extreme sport as well. So
Hmm.
in free riding, just because the terrain is very steep and rocky, there are sections where if you were to fall, you could injure yourself, or you need to expect fairly serious consequences. So this situation of a mistake may lead to a serious consequence, that's mentally very challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
so what about this nature of it, which is that you're judged subjectively? So like in a climbing competition, like they just give each of the holds a point, and like there's like bits of gray area, like did that person touch it? Did they hold it?
Mm-hmm.
But really it's not as subjective, right, as actually just being um given points based on your style and things like that. Like from a mental perspective, how do you manage that? Because how does it feel when you feel like you've given your best and then you feel like you've been judged unfairly? I mean, did that ever happen? And how did that go down?
Yeah. I love this question, Hazel, because I think you're getting to the core of a really important issue. So, the way I dealt with it, and this is really important to get, is that you need to be able to separate your personal performance with what the judges think. Because, for example, like let's look at this situation. Say you just did this amazing line. You were able to ski your line just as you planned. It was fluid and aggressive and everything. It was one of your best performances ever, but there just also happened to be two other competitors who had an awesome line and they were judged better. So now you're maybe only third or fourth. And if you're like, oh man, I just came fourth, like that sucks. And I obviously didn't do very well. That's completely undermining your own personal performance. And it's going to be very damaging for your confidence, for your motivation. Like it's really important to realize that your personal performance is separate from the scores that the judges are giving you. And yeah, that's how I dealt with it. So, I often came into a competition and just learned to focus on myself, essentially. So I
Mm-hmm.
used to look a lot at my competition. I used to think about, what kind of line is she going to do? Oh, she's probably going to jump this really high cliff because I know that that's what she likes to do and likes to look at in lines. Or maybe I need to do this too. And then the more mature I got in the whole competition game, the more I learned to just focus on my own strengths and my own challenge that I wanted to set myself on this particular event on that particular day. And that was a huge step for me in terms of focusing on my own skiing and being able to be really present in the line that I wanted to do. And everything else kind of pulled me away from my own skiing and from my own um, goals as well that I would have. So towards the end of my career, I wasn't really paying very much attention to the competition at all. I'm going to say maybe 5% or 10% maybe of my attention. Sometimes to get information, oh, what does the snow actually really look like? Or, how did she manage that? Do I need to uh, consider some additional factors that I hadn't thought of before, more for my own kind of information, but not in terms of, that she just did that. Well, maybe I need to do that too. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that really helped me with my focus and with dealing with the pressure and dealing with the whole. I used to be super stressed out. And I think that was a big part of it, is because I focused too much on my competition.
Right. So you really felt like your performance and your performance in these competitions improved a lot when you took your attention away from your competitors and just focused on you. So
Exactly.
how do you balance that though with like the desire to win and the kind of,
Mm-hmm.
what do you walk into a competition with? Like what intention do you have? Is it to win or is it to like do your best or like, what's actually your goal there? Because obviously if if you weren't competing against other people, you could just do it yourself. So there's obviously some desire there to be in the competition. So how did you balance that?
Mm-hmm. I went through a big process of change in this regard. So I used to focus on winning or wanting to win or external results. I used to go into competition and say to myself, okay, I really want a podium here, or I need to podium here because I need points to be able to qualify for next year or qualify for the next stop. So I was very much focused on these outcomes. And of course, Hazel, as you know, we don't really have control over those outcomes. So through my whole journey and also learning about mental strength and flow psychology, I learned to completely change my approach from focusing on outcomes, fixed outcomes, to focusing on the process, which was an entirely different goal altogether. Like basically in my championship season, I was not thinking about becoming a world champion. I completely let that goal go. And like it was an emotional letting go, I have to say, that happened quite a long time before that championship season. And my goal was to find flow in my runs, which is a learning goal, a process goal. So I wanted to find flow. I wanted to challenge myself, enjoy myself, and ideally find flow from the start to the finish. And that's what I put my focus on. So now, instead of being like, okay, I'm going to ski the winning line and this is what I need to ski, I was like, okay, so at the last comp or last year at this venue, this is the line that I skied. How can I, up the challenge a little bit? Or where am I at right now? Where can I find that balance between skills, my own personal skills, and the challenge I want to set myself? So it became very personal to
Mm.
my own skills, which is exactly where you have a greater chance of getting into flow, of course. So I was much more aware of, okay, where is this skills challenge balance? If I wanted to challenge myself a little bit more, I did that consciously. I was like, okay, I think I can jump this bigger cliff. Conditions are looking pretty good. I'm feeling really good. I'm strong. My training's been great. I'm going to aim for this bigger cliff. I still feel like I have an 80% chance of actually executing it really well. And so, yeah, I basically just focused on the challenge that I wanted to set myself while being aware of what my personal skills are and how I was feeling on the day.
That's really
And
cool.
then as a byproduct, I became world champion. That just happened
Just a little
as a
cherry on the top
byproduct.
of the cake, like not that important.
Yeah. And look, Hazel, like honestly, this is the most important thing that I learned through all my competitions because you're not taught that stuff. Like, I can't tell you how many, like, even sports psychologists I work with who would get me to visualize myself like at the top of the podium, like holding my trophy up above me, where it was all about this outcome goal. I didn't need that. Like, I really wanted that desperately. My problem was I needed to learn to focus more on what it was that I really wanted to do at the time on my skiing. And so that was, it sounds simple, maybe. Yeah, focus on the process, don't focus on the outcomes. But for me, that was a massive mindset shift that really changed the game.
Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
cool. Um, I guess, I mean, I'm always banging on about this in my coaching. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know how
bet.
many people listen to me or whether they do or not. Um, you said that it was like an emotional letting go. Like what, can you describe that to us? And also just like, and I struggle this with my coaching and, all the stuff I talk
Mm-hmm.
about is like, how does one go about focusing more on the process? Like, do you, because the thing with physical training is you can just hand someone a list of tasks, right? And they go and do it. But it's quite different with mental training, right? The inner work is a lot less tangible. And I just wondered if you had any like tips or like whether you could explain in more detail that process of letting go of the outcome. Like, because I think sometimes people, it's like if you tell them, oh, you'll better achieve the outcome if you focus on the process. But then, of course, they're still kind of valuing the outcome more than the process, right? And the only reason they're focusing more on the process is because they still want to get to the outcome. So they're kind of like cheating it. And I don't know how much
Mm-hmm.
that works. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
get it.
Tell me.
Um, Love that question as well. So the emotional letting go happened with me when I actually really said to myself, Lorraine, even if you don't become world champion, like you have had a really good career. Like I was already runner up world champion. I had, you know, completed so many of my goals. I had gotten to a level of skiing that I never really thought was going to be possible. And so I told myself, even if you don't achieve this goal of being world champion, you have still been so successful. Like basically accepting that it was good enough. And that is like having that good enoughness, that acceptance is something that I'm personally still really working on a lot because I am a high achiever. I do expect a lot of myself, and these are characteristics that I don't wish away because otherwise I'm sure I wouldn't have ever achieved a lot of the things that I have achieved in my life, and I would have experienced all the cool highlights I've experienced. But basically that was the process. It was letting go of this desperate need to be world champion because it was like this desperate need. It was like, I need to become world champion so that all the work I've put into this is justified. Like I would link it with that. Only if I have this title can I really justify why I've spent 10 years of my life doing this, as
Mm,
opposed to valuing the journey. valuing everything that I learned, like the way that I had changed emotionally, physically, mentally, the cool people I got to meet, the amazing experiences I had. Like that journey is mine to keep. No one can ever take that away from me, regardless of whether I have that top-notch place or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was that emotional process that was really important. And then I have to say, like, to me, focusing on something like finding flow and enjoying the process, that comes fairly easily to me. I don't think of myself as this super competitive person that needs to be the best, because I do know some competitors who they just want to be the best. It's this crazy drive in them. I just love to be my best. You know,
Mm.
that was fairly a natural step for me to take. I just didn't know to take it. I didn't have the education.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but you know, there are some people who have, and it usually always has to do with psychological issues, especially self-value, and linking it to
Mm-hmm.
something. They just think that if they are the best, they've really made it in life and stuff like that. But yeah, it's valuing the journey over just the results, then realizing that
Mm.
that journey is something for you to have forever and evermore, that's where the real value lies. Because whether you have that trophy up there or not, yes, it can open some doors, absolutely, but the value lies in the journey. That's where your memories are. That's where you're going to be looking back and thinking, wow, that was like such an exciting and intense life that I got to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, if you have if you're not having a good time and you're not making good memories and you're not finding flow, I guess not only are you less likely to achieve those big goals, but also when you do achieve them, are they worth it if you kind of ruined the process with like having a bad mindset, you know? And I do see that a lot in climbing. Like some of the people at the top, I'm like, well, I don't know, you're sort of advertising like being really good, but I don't know if you're advertising like this is a lifestyle choice, you know, because like you don't
Mm-hmm.
actually look that happy. This is definitely not all top climbers at all, and actually, I wouldn't say even most, but we do
Yeah.
see that sometimes, don't we, in sport,
Mm-hmm.
where the people at the top don't look super happy and get very angry. Yeah, I was really interested by what you were saying about sort of like good enough. And it really made me think of a few of the other things you mentioned afterwards around self-worth and self-value.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think, like, I guess there's two parts to my question, but like, it did occur to me that, like, what if you're a young athlete and you know, you can't say, oh, what I've done so far is good enough? Like, what would you say to that person to help them with their mindset? And then also, you know, how much is that good enough tied to your like sense of self-worth independent of your sport, I suppose.
Well, for a young athlete, I mean, they have everything ahead of them, right? It's like this exciting future. They have so much to learn. Basically, just sending them the message that they have time, that it doesn't have to all happen at once, that they have to be successful overnight, that it's a process, which also means that it takes time, that it's going to be full of failure and learning and like setbacks, where that's where they get the really rich experiences. And you, I know that you know this super good, that without the failures you can't get better. You really need them. It's Yeah, I think for a young athlete to understand this, that it doesn't have to be all happening at once and immediately, and just to have patience and to let it develop. The process
Mm-hmm.
is a really powerful message as well to give them, and maybe something that is a challenge, because in our society I feel like, especially over here in the States, like young people have this massive pressure of just having to be successful straight away, and you have no time to lose, and you got to get out there and, live your life. And yeah, just like slowing things down a little bit and realizing that good things take time and that it's a development and all part of the process. I think that takes a lot of pressure off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but
And
I guess, that it's still important to work on the mindset of being process oriented, right? Or otherwise that learning process is impeded by having your focus too much on outcomes. Um,
absolutely. Yeah. Valuing that learning, really having the intention to learn and not being obsessed or too taken up with the results.
yeah.
Yeah. It
I think it's
really is
harder for
a
young people somehow to see that. I don't know why I think that though. So maybe I'm wrong.
maybe it is. Maybe it's a personality thing as well.
Mm,
And I want to say, um, I don't want to make it a bad thing to want to be world champion, like to have those
mm,
goals. That's not what it's about. They can actually exist parallel to each other.
yeah.
So I think this is actually a really important thing to point out, because having that goal was a huge motivator for me. And that is a good
Yeah.
thing, because now you have a vision, which gives you direction. It gives you also something to talk about, maybe with sponsors, if that's what you want to do. It gives you direction. So it's a really good thing. But come competition season time, that's when you have to be ruthless with focusing your attention on what really matters in the moment, to have that like awareness and education of, okay, the world championship goal is, I'm putting it way to the side, and the more desperately I want this, the more important it is to really be good at
Mm,
this thing. Now I'm focusing my attention on the process and on all the little decisions that you take throughout that day, whether it's training, whether it's a competition. That's where I'm focusing my attention on, and I'm putting the big achievement goal aside for now. So yes, you can have both, but I think first comes this more achievement goal, perhaps, such as world championship or whatever it might be, for your own personal development. And then you shift your focus to the process. And doing
mm-hmm.
that shift is, I think, the key. And that's something I didn't understand also for a long time. I thought I had to, like, that it was a bad thing to want to be world champion. It's absolutely not. It's just knowing when it is important to focus on the process and when it is important to just completely let all thoughts of results go and be ruthless about it. Like leading up to a competition, if I thought anything like, oh, I really want to win this, or I've got to get this and this many points, I would immediately stop that kind of thinking and
Mm,
even maybe use a mantra or just remind myself, wait, what am I here for? Okay, I'm here to find flow in my runs. I'm here to challenge myself. I'm here to enjoy myself in, yeah. So just
right.
reminding myself. And I actually had a couple of um, like things in place. For example, at the finals of my world championship season, my boyfriend was with me at the time, and I asked him to ask me 3 times a day at least, like, what is your goal here? And then
Oh,
I would
cool.
keep my mantra. I would be like, okay, my goal is to learn and grow, to find flow and enjoy the process. And then I also had it written up on a big cardboard yellow piece of paper, and I had that stuck in my hotel room so it was really visible, because the pressure was definitely building for the
Mm.
finals. Like I had to be really focused and ruthless about it. So I used those cues to help me as well.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, it's cool that you said, it's not that it's bad to have big goals
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's tricky because I'm often going on about the process because I feel like just we're often so focused on the achievement that then you want to swing the needle the other way. But you're right, these things can exist in parallel. Um, and I think it's also just like the mindset you bring, isn't it? It's not like don't set big goals or only focus on the process or whatever. It's also just the mindset you have towards the big goals and the mindset you have towards the process. And I don't know, like, whether how much of there's distinction between like a good or like a helpful mindset and an unhelpful mindset is
Mhm.
around like fear. Because sometimes I think about it in those terms of like, well, like, you know, am I doing this big impressive thing because I'm scared of not? Because like that sounds a bit weird in your head, but someone in your position, right, who's had this career of almost being free ride world
Mhm.
champion, like there's probably fear around not achieving that goal, right?
There is a lot
Um,
of fear
and
around
so
it.
it's yeah, so then it's like, okay, so what's driving you towards this big goal? Is it like the love of that challenge and like the excitement of being there, or is it like the fear of not achieving the thing? And I think that that's sometimes the distinction when it comes to big goal setting. Just wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I really relate to what you're saying because I do remember having genuine anxiety around, wow, what if I never achieve this? Like I've put so much work and effort into this. I've really, not that I felt like it was a sacrifice, but essentially, yeah, I've spent 10 years of my life just on this thing. Like, and I do think to get that real high performance, you have to be pretty single minded. And, sometimes relationships suffer for it. And they did. I had certain relationships that fell by the wayside because I was so focused on skiing. And, if the snow was good, well, I was off. Um, so there was a lot of anxiety, but that's where this self compassion essentially comes into it, where I was like, you know what, Lorraine, like, seriously, you've done so amazing. Like, everything you've achieved so much more than you ever thought. It still is good enough. And like, we're back to that. But um, on the other side, you have this anxiety for sure. And I did have that. It's such a paradox. It's a real paradox. The more you want to win sometimes, and the more you're focused on that, especially in the competition moment, the further away you're going to be from winning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really what we're essentially talking about is being really good at managing your attention. Is my attention placed on outcomes, results, winning, or am I able to really place my attention on the process? And like, that is for me the essence of mental strength.
Yeah.
Having that control over where I decide my attention is going to be placed. And since I've educated myself, I know it's much more useful for me, for my performance in the moment, to place my attention on the process and on how I want to ski as opposed to outcomes. Like, I know this. So, yeah, that's really what it's about. And I managed to learn to focus my attention on the right things at the right time. And that's essentially what you need to do to be able to perform at your best. And then you're going to start growing your confidence and really enjoying yourself. And you will have good results as well, which is super motivating. Um, you asked
Yeah.
me something else, and I think I've forgotten it.
Well, yeah, just about it kind of like being fear-based sometimes
Mm-hmm.
and you talking about that anxiety and
Yeah.
yeah, I wondered if like if you thought have you thought kind of a lot about that and whether like you could replace that with more of like I don't want to say love-based, but basically just being positive. I mean,
Yeah.
a positive mindset's pretty basic, isn't it, in terms of sports psychology? But I know that when I go into something feeling positive, I perform way better. Whereas if I go into something and I feel afraid, like I feel
Mm-hmm.
a fear of failure, or it's not to say that I can't perform well, um, with any amount of fear. And sometimes fear can really kind of like heighten the senses and stuff. But I definitely like do better when it comes from this place of like I want to be here rather than I want to get this over and done with, which I think can end up how you
Hmm.
feel quite a lot of the time, right? As when because you're piling all this pressure on, there's tons of anxiety around like won't I succeed this in this thing? And we have that in climbing a lot. It's probably not quite as high pressure as what you do in these competitions, but it's certainly there even with like project climbing. Um, so yeah, I don't know if you have anything about how you manage that.
Yeah, no, I love that question. I think like I have thought a lot about this, and fear can be a huge motivator. It really can. So in psychology, it is generally recognized that it's a personality trait whether you're more motivated out of fear or out of a hope for success. So, if you had no awareness and you went through your whole life without ever hearing about this, then you would probably have more of a tendency to be either or. But with education and developing self awareness, you can work at being, for example, more motivated through a hope of success and through this, what you were saying is positive and being optimistic about something. And but I think it takes genuine like intention and work to be able to change that kind of approach
Mm,
mindset. I find it interesting that people can be like, in terms of their more stable traits, they can be put into either one or the other category, and it depends on the context as well. It could be that in one certain area of life you're more motivated by fear, and in another area of life it's more motivated through a hope for success. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and I agree with you that uh the fear-based motivation has certain limitations that I feel like the hope-based motivation overcomes in a better way. But I definitely recognize that they can both be motivational. And motivation is
mm.
kind of a tricky thing.
Yeah, it's interesting
Um,
because I don't know if I would see the opposite as hope based because
mm-hmm,
yeah, I would see it more as like you know, I would see it more as like sort of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? Like extrinsic motivators are often fear based, not
mm-hmm,
always, but they often are. Whereas intrinsic motivations usually like more love based, like not love as in romantic love, but as in like you want to be there because you value the thing in and of itself. And I feel like that's what you were saying at the start of the conversation, right? Is that like in focusing on flow in your runs and finding the right challenge level, you weren't fear based. Your motivation to be there
mm-hmm,
wasn't fear based because you love being in flow and you love getting the challenge level right. Whereas like if you'd gone into it going, I want to do my best because I'm fearful of not winning.
mm-hmm,
It's a different, not only is it like more negative, and I feel like for me, negativity like saps my energy.
mm-hmm,
But it's harder to have your attention in the run, right? Because you're dropping into that run with like having your motivation not be on the process of the actual run, because the outcomes that you want aren't based on what you do in the moments when you're skiing down the mountain. They're based on what happens after that fact, which is actually out of your control as well, right? So that's another element to it. Um, so yeah, it's funny, but I see what you mean with the hope based. Is that kind of like a distinction in psychology, is it?
yeah, it is. I don't know if I'm translating it correctly. uh with hope, Hoffnung auf Erfolg, it would be in German, which basically means just having that, like moving towards something, as
Mm,
opposed to being motivated to avoid something. That's kind of what we're talking about. Like, I'm really
yeah.
motivated to like
It's a pull
avoid
instead of
this.
a push, I suppose,
Yes,
isn't it?
exactly.
That's the
Mm-hmm.
distinction in psychology I've heard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
But
it.
it depends. what the pull is towards. Is it towards the experience you're going to have in the run, or is it the pull towards the achievement you're going to have at the end? And that's
It's your decision to make. That's the cool thing.
yeah.
Yeah, that is the cool thing. And like I'm living proof that you can change that, because I used to make it about the results, and I was able to change that, and actually very successfully. And yes, it took some effort. Like I didn't change it during my competition season, mind you. Like it did happen the summer before, which is something I would recommend anyone to do, like to really do this inner work before you actually get into these situations of stress and the pressure and all that, so that you're solid and you know what you're there for and you know what your real motivation is. But you can't cheat this. You know how you were talking about before, like you're kind of cheating a little bit? Because when you get in the pressure situation, you will default to what you really, truly care about. So
Yeah.
you do need to reprogram your brain in a way.
Mm,
That's what it
yeah.
takes, which,
Yeah.
you know, I was able to do it. I'm not going to say it's maybe super easy, especially once you get older, because, you know, actually after 25, our brain isn't even as plastic anymore as we think it is.
But maybe
Um,
you've got more maturity, and you've got
yes.
lessons learned in your life, and you've
Yeah.
seen how actually some ways of doing things aren't as good as other ways of doing it and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's right.
there's maybe more benefits. I'm not sure.
But it
Um,
takes intention, and it takes uh, directed attention. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, cool. You talk quite a lot about confidence. I'd be interested to hear sort of, how you think of confidence is actually sort of it's almost hard to define, isn't it? Confidence. We all know what it means, but it is tricky. And how to
Mm-hmm.
build confidence and how you personally build confidence and also how you, because I know that you're quite passionate about teaching how to build confidence,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. So, like, the way I like to think of confidence is having having a self-belief in my own abilities, which means that, you know, when I think about how I'm going to apply myself to a certain task, that I really believe that I have the ability to do that. So that's the kind of confidence I'm talking about, in especially in a sports context, which is super important. The way I managed to build my confidence is by truly being intentional about the level of challenges I set myself. So I used to go into competitions where I was a bit more driven by my ego. And I used to be like, okay, like this is the freeride world tour. Like I have to do something crazy out there to justify why I even get to be here. And, you know, like I used to think I had to do something extraordinary to show the world so that I could justify why I was qualified for the Freeride World Tour. And I would choose a line that was way over my head, that I didn't feel comfortable with. And then I kind of like skied it really hesitatingly, and it doesn't look good. The judges can tell, well, she doesn't feel comfortable and she's not doing something that, you know, she usually does probably. And so when I realized that I don't need to do these crazy things, that if I do something that I actually know that I can do, that is actually already really good. So I had to
Mm-hmm.
learn that my level of what I thought was good enough is actually that's good enough. Like I don't have to like magic anything crazy, and that's where you're going to be able to perform well. So what I did was I learned to manage this challenge better, because once I actually also had the opposite situation. I went into a competition thinking, oh, this is a piece of cake, and I chose a too easy line because I thought my competitors weren't that good. And I chose a super mellow line and I
This is
didn't
the problem with
qualify.
focusing on your competitors, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And I didn't qualify for the finals, although I should have easily been able to do that.
Right.
So like have that challenge level where you choose a challenge that matches your personal skills, or maybe the challenge is a little bit above your skill level. So
Yeah.
that's how you can build your confidence in a really like in a sustainable way, because you don't, especially as an extreme sports athlete, you do not want to way shoot over your limits and perhaps injure yourself or worse, like you need to like get home safely, and you also need to save yourself from these situations where you completely blow up and crash and everything like ends in disaster. Just like little incremental steps, little like setting yourself the right challenge is one of the key things to building your confidence, which is really empowering, because now it makes you realize, hey, this is something that I can actually control, because I choose the line that I ski, or I choose my next climbing route that I want to really work on. It's my decision, right? So
Yeah.
that's a really cool thing. And then the second thing I think that is like absolutely key is learning to treat yourself with kindness and learning to be your own really good inner coach. So what I'm talking about here is, how do I talk to myself, especially in situations where I'm struggling to perform? So, there are different variations of how I could talk to myself. I could be like, God, Lorraine, you idiot, you always screw this up. Like, why can't you do this already? Like, what is your problem? You suck. I could talk to myself like that. Or I could talk to myself like, okay, yep, right now I'm really struggling with this, but hey, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to challenge myself. So, okay, let's try again. Like, bring it on. Like, yeah, I'm going to give it another go and do my best. Or, okay, so today didn't work out very well, but tomorrow's a new day. Or basically, you want to learn to talk to yourself like a really good coach would talk to you, because it has a huge impact on how you feel about your personal abilities to do something.
Yeah, that's great. That's some very good tips. Um, you've mentioned quite a few times the challenge skill level,
Mm-hmm.
which we both know is kind of one of the first.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the most important thing for accessing flow, right? If the challenge level is too high, it's frustrating. If the challenge level is too low, it's boring. Um, I guess the really nice thing about the Freeride World Cup, you've got all of these like variable things, and it's obviously
Mm-hmm.
like lots of unknowns, but you actually choose your challenge. Whereas in a lot of competitions, climbing included, people don't get to choose their challenge. The route is set for them, and they can't
Mm-hmm.
pick their challenge. But obviously, most people listening are not going to be competitors. Um, and yeah, just, how does one go about making sure that they're getting the challenge level right? Like, do you have any kind of practical tips for that?
Yeah, I do. So our body can really help us. Our emotional reaction can be a good indication of whether we've chosen the right challenge level or not. So you already spoke about this frustration that you feel of like stress, anxiety. If you've chosen a challenge level that is well beyond your subjective personal skills on that day, right? If you're like super stressed out, like I used to be at the competitions, it's a good indication that maybe you've chosen a challenge level that is too high. So
Yeah,
what you could do is really bring it down a notch, so that you are able to get back into that flow channel where you feel like, okay, this is a situation that I can,
manage, I
like,
suppose.
I'll be able to manage it. I'm not going to
Yeah.
completely destroy myself or something. And at the same time, if you're going into a challenge and you're like, I've totally got this, like, got everything under control, or maybe you're even bored, well, that's a big indicator. Okay, you need to challenge yourself more. You have to find creative ways of upping the challenge level, because you're not going to be able to access flow either through being bored and choosing a challenge level that's too low. So listen to your body. If like what flows into this is realizing that a certain level of like anxiety or like arousal actually is probably the better word, but it's the same symptoms as anxiety. We know what the symptoms are like. It's like your heart starts beating faster. You might get sweaty palms. Maybe you have to go to the toilet all the time. I used to get like really shaky knees, or your mouth gets dry, that kind of thing. You have butterflies in your stomach. You might have to vomit. So if you have really extreme symptoms, then I would suggest toning it down a little bit. You could also do some deep belly breathing to try and bring your arousal levels back down. So activating your relaxation response a bit more, because if you get into this total like over arousal, you're not going to be able to perform either. But a certain level of arousal is a really good thing. And I just want to tell you listeners that knowing that and accepting that, expecting it, even like, okay, yep, my body's starting to prepare. I'm starting to feel the butterflies in my tummy. I'm starting to get the heart rate going up. It's my body preparing for the challenge. It's going to really hone my focus. This is a good thing. Like, yeah, bring it on. So what I'm talking about here is having like, don't be afraid of that, because I used to believe, oh, I'm starting to get nervous. Like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to ski anymore. Like, I'm not going to be able to ski at my level. So I just had this negative belief attached to these symptoms of arousal or anxiety that was actually the cause of stress then. So know that some level of arousal is really good, and become familiar with what is your ideal level of arousal. So, if it would be unthinkable for me to be at a Freeride World Tour competition or any kind of challenge, even if that's maybe speaking in front of a big audience and just feeling super calm and like totally composed. That's not realistic. And that's, we need to feel aroused to be able to really perform and focus, and it's a good thing. Like, use that, and realize, don't be scared of that. That's
Yeah.
also a learning that I had to go through, because it used to really stress me out, and then I would be like, oh my god, I'm getting nervous now I won't be able to ski anymore.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's the same with the skills challenge flow channel. There's also one for
Mm-hmm.
like arousal level, right? Like as we become more aroused, and this is like in the sports psychology meaning of the term. But as that anxiety level increases, we'll meet our peak performance and then it will drop off as it.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is actually just reframing those feelings as being something to help us also helps us manage it, which is quite interesting, right? Because if it's creeping up a bit high and you're like, but this is good, I need to feel this way in order to perform, it actually can drop them a little bit too.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I've noticed as well is that like my anxiety levels are always so much higher before I get on the wall. And actually, when I
Mm-hmm.
start the climbing, because I've got something to focus on, my anxiety levels drop. So I always know, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is actually the worst part. And I've just got to manage this. I've got to get through it. And I know that as soon as I get on the wall, it's actually going to be easier. So that's something that helps me as well.
Yeah, I can
Um,
relate to that, Hazel. The waiting in the start gate was always the
I
worst.
can't imagine because I can, like, yeah, like, with climbing, like, because I don't compete, I used to, but, in some ways, though, being told when to go maybe is less anxiety inducing. I don't know. But, like, yeah, I don't know. There's pros and cons probably, but a few things came up for me then when you were speaking, and one is that getting the challenge level right. It seems like the main thing is like to just be really intentional about it. So
Mhm.
whether you're like on the rock or like on the slope or off the slope, reflecting on your recent run or reflecting on your recent climb, it's like, okay, how was that for me? what do I need to do next time to get the challenge level better? And I think that's something that we just don't do enough of, is just be really intentional around finding a challenge level, probably because we're too focused on achieving the thing. Like in
Mhm.
climbing, more so than skiing, I think, for the average climber, it's like the aim is to get to the top all the time. And it's to
Mhm.
get to the top of the hardest thing you can do. Um, or to just not fall. There's different
Mhm.
approaches, but like if we were more intentional about going, okay, actually, how can I find the best challenge level for me today? Like, what would your climbing day be like if you could have that as your goal, to just find the right challenge level? And then like the other thing that came to mind was also just like self-awareness. You're talking about like tuning into your body. It seems like if we're not tuned into our body, it's really hard for us to know whether we're at that right challenge level or not. Are there any practices that you use to help improve your self awareness?
I just wanted to add something to what you mentioned about being aware of the challenge level and thinking more about that. Like I this is the stuff that I would like live for. I used to geek out on ski. I still do. I geek out on ski technique. I freaking love it.
I
So
needed I need a lesson with you because my
yeah, that would
skiing's
be
very
fun.
bad and I skied into a tree this year and really badly injured
Oh, don't do
myself.
that.
So probably because
Well,
I
if
thought
you
I was better than the challenge level. That's why I did.
well, but you need to make the mistakes as well to learn. So
Mm-hmm.
if you give me a lesson on the wall, that's a deal.
Yeah, nice.
But basically, you want to be really deliberate with your practice. So, what I would do, and I never had a coach, which is something maybe that people might be interested in. So, this was especially important to me because otherwise, a coach would maybe be this person for you. And the coach would be like, okay, we need to work on this now. We need to work on this. And these are still your weaknesses. But like in freeriding, I think it's similar to climbing. You're the one who's deciding, well, what is it that I want to work on now? Where are my weaknesses? Where are my strengths? Like, what's the next step for me? So I'm sure your listeners can relate. And I would, for example, set myself a process goal for my day of skiing. So it would be training in that way, then, as opposed to if you just went skiing with a bunch of friends and just having fun. For me, training is a lot more deliberate. So I would go out and say, okay, today I'm going to really prioritize takeoffs. I'm going to practice takeoffs. So that means like jumping, but really focusing on my body mechanics at the takeoff. So I would break it down to specific body movements that I wanted to focus my attention on. So now I'm focusing on extending my hip at the takeoff, and I'm focusing on really pushing off the balls of my feet at the takeoff. And that's what I would do all day long in terms of focusing my attention, but also choosing the right terrain where I can practice this. So I might just lap the same run 10 times where I knew I can do 3 different jumps per run or 5 different jumps per run so I can get repetition, and that's how I improved. And I think it's
Practice.
very applicable to climbing as well. And it's so fun to be deliberate like that because then you
Mm.
start also really seeing progress, and you're getting into the whole technical side of things, and it gets really exciting because it makes you fall in love with the process, like, and that's essential, fall in love with all these movements and with what it takes to actually execute these movements. Then you're in the process and you're not going to have to work really hard to not want the outcome and all that. Like, fall in love with the movement of climbing, with the movement of skiing.
Yeah, which we already all are in love with, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no
Mm-hmm.
chance that you will have stuck at climbing if you just didn't really like how it feels. So
That's
that's the
right.
thing. It's really easy for people to come back to their intrinsic motivators and that kind of thing because they are there for everyone. It's just how much attention we put on them. Um, yeah, that's great. And then yeah, just that question about self-awareness. I mean, yeah, how much do
Mm-hmm.
you think about that? And do you have anything that you do to improve your self-awareness?
Well, yes, I would say probably the key skill is to learn to be an observer. Um, mindfulness talks a lot about this, where you actually create some distance between yourself and your thoughts. And I specifically remember when I had the realization of, holy crap, like I'm not my thoughts. I don't have to even listen to these thoughts. Like, yes, they come up, but it doesn't mean that they're telling some truth about who I am. I can actually decide whether I'm going to really listen to them, engage with them, believe them, or whether I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Well, let's just put that aside for now. I don't need to focus on that right now. Like having that realization you are not your thoughts, and that your brain is basically coming up with thoughts all the time, pop, 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 pop. Some are useful and some are less useful. And that distance and being able to observe your thoughts with less emotional attachment is going to be a really key skill to developing awareness, because now you can start looking at situations like, interesting. So when I'm in this situation, this was the thought I was having. Well, what does that say maybe about internal beliefs that I'm carrying that I might not be aware of? So it can uncover certain things. So I'd say that's
Yeah.
a good first step.
Nice. Cool. I like that. Um, Finally, how much time have you got?
I'm open actually.
Okay.
So
Okay, cool. I'm a bit wary of taking up your time.
no, you're good. Your
Um,
questions have been amazing. So I'm really enjoying the
nice. Good.
conversation.
Um, okay. Well, I'll ask you a few more then. Um, do you have any cool tools that you use in the moment? And I'm interested in this because I think that the tools you probably use in skiing are going to be pretty different from climbing just because of the
Mm-hmm.
speed element. Um, And I think in climbing, actually, one of the biggest barriers to flow is how slow you can be and how much time you can spend on the
Mm.
wall thinking things that aren't that helpful. Whereas I imagine more in skiing, it's like you kind of just have to drop into flow, right? Because things are happening. And that's why skiing's so fun. Every time I go skiing, I'm like, wow, skiing is so much more fun than climbing. Um, but I love climbing for lots of reasons. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, like are you actually kind of doing anything to manage your psychology when you're in the run, or do you kind of just like drop into flow, you become the task, or are you actually like in and out of flow sometimes, and you actually have to manage your psychology in the moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we're talking about tools for keeping your focus on the now during the performance. So we're not talking about leading up to or in the
Yeah.
start gate or anything. So yes, absolutely. I've experienced that. I can go in and out of flow. Like sometimes I'll be in flow doing quite well, and then a thought will shoot through my head like, I actually had a competition where this happened to me. This was when I was still really focused on outcomes and pretty stressed. I did really well in the top section, and then approached the bottom half of my run, and then this thought shot through my head, don't crash now, like whatever you do, don't crash, because I'd done fairly well up to then and I knew I had to podium, otherwise I wasn't going to requalify. And then my line went to shit. Basically, I didn't jump my last two features that I had planned, which would have been really important for building my line score. And I just kind of freaked out and I just skied straight into the finish line. And I was so bummed and disappointed that I didn't even attempt my jumps. Um, so you can definitely fall out of flow. In this case, it did have that context of me being super anxious about not achieving results. So I do think, if your intention is to find flow and you're really open for whatever it is that's coming, you're able to react quite instinctively in the moment. But what I have used is just saying to myself now or here. Like if I notice my thoughts are maybe wandering, I'll be like now. Like something really short like that. Um I have also used I have briefly placed my attention on my breath, which I'm going to say briefly in skiing, because you really need to have your attention outwards,
Mm,
like the terrain and where am I, how fast
yeah.
am I approaching stuff. But I think with like with climbing, I imagine breathing being so key,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
key.
It's for
Yeah.
staying present and for managing stress. It's got like two
Mm-hmm.
purposes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did once make also the mistake of having my attention focused too much inwards, where I was like, building up these feelings of gratitude and excitement, which I knew were good for me to manage the pressure at the start. But I was too much focused inwards, and I actually needed to focus my attention on where I was going, and I lost my line. I was like,
Okay,
"You have got to
interesting.
be kidding me!"
That's
Yeah.
funny.
So it's fascinating how, depending on where you place your attention, you're that's yeah, it's really key. So with climbing, I imagine you have more time perhaps to go inward for a little bit, and to perhaps decrease arousal levels or reground yourself, and then be conscious then again of, okay, now I'm focusing on my next hold, my
Yeah.
next move.
It depends on the type of climbing. I mean, with sport climbing, you often hang out at rests, and it can be
Mm-hmm.
when you pop out of flow.
Mm-hmm.
But something like bouldering, you don't have that time, and you couldn't do that kind of mid crux sequence. So yeah, a lot of the prep's got to be before the climb, just as I imagine the same in skiing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of these tools can help, but really, if your attention is on the tool, it's not on the task at hand, and you do want your attention on the task at hand. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really about the build up, isn't it? It's where it's what you're doing with your mind to allow yourself to just be engaged with the task versus
Mm-hmm.
be distracted from the task. That's really funny as well that you were like, don't crash now. And then also that, this idea that like positive thoughts can be just as distracting as
Mm-hmm.
negative thoughts, right? And then it's so silly when you see all this stuff in sports psychology of like, just say that you can do it. Like, just think the whole time about how you
Mm-hmm.
can do it. And it's like, well, those thoughts aren't helping you do what you need to do in the moment.
Yeah,
Making
they
it
can be
gentle.
distracting. It is. It's really interesting that way. I think I read this awesome quote by Rafael Nadal, where he said, as he's playing tennis, if I have a thought about losing, like squash it. If I have a thought about how well I'm doing, squash that too. Yeah, those thoughts are distracting. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But to your point as well about, you don't want to actually be distracted by focusing your attention on the tool. That's where practice does come into it. So with a keyword such as now, it's something that you want to practice,
Yeah.
so that it's fairly automated.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to use it for the first time in a competition situation, or when your performance is really important or whatever. You actually want to use this in training, so that it becomes second nature and actually is useful to you, and doesn't just distract you. And you're probably going to forget about it anyway if you don't practice it. You're not going to remember to use it in the stress situation. It's just not even going to occur to you. So
Yeah.
it does need to be practiced for it to be of any use.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really all the build up, isn't it? Um, it's all about the prep, it feels
Yep,
like
that's
anything,
right.
you know.
It really is. Yeah. And then
Um, oh
the
sorry.
other tool, really, Hazel, is visualization. Like, I think
Mm,
uh, it was so key to why I was able to perform. And I didn't only visualize, like, basically, like, the overarching concept is I visualized my line from start to finish in my own perspective, not only seeing the terrain and seeing exactly where I wanted to jump and what I would do after the jump. And I visualized emotions as well. So,
mm-hmm.
I added in a feeling of like like really wanting to jump and being excited, and a feeling of like determination when I was stomping the landing, like really landing with a lot of conviction. Um, and I didn't stop visualizing, or I knew I wasn't ready to compete until I had this internal movie from start to finish that flowed through without ever stopping or seeing any horror images, which is something that would happen where I would see myself crash and be like, okay, stop, rewind back to the start again. Like the whole movie went it flowing from start to finish, where I knew exactly always what it was that was coming next, and I added the emotions, and that is a huge confidence builder, by the way, because basically your brain has already practiced.
Yeah.
Me, because remember, we can't do these lines, and it's the same with on-site climbing. You can't do the lines beforehand. So your brain, though, has the option, if you're good at visualizing and it's really realistic, it's like simulation. It's like as if I had done that run 20 times. And that was huge. That was like one of
Yeah.
the main skills to build confidence and to be absolutely sure of, I can do this. Like I know I can. I've visualized it already. I know exactly what it is that I want to do.
But what
Now all
happens
I need
when
to
the
do.
reality doesn't meet the visualization? Because like so I sort of call it more like rehearsing, where because
Mm-hmm.
with project climbing you try the route first and then you
Right.
learn it, and then I rehearse it over and over in my head, and I do what
Mm-hmm.
you've done here with also like how I want to feel when I'm climbing it as well, and I always
Mm-hmm.
rehearse doing the route, not falling off the route.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't rehearse on-site climbing. And I actually kind of love to really go in cold on-site climbing and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like let go and just follow my intuition basically.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and like the idea of like visualizing an on-site climb without doing it to me sounds like a bad idea. I don't know. I just
Yeah.
because
Interesting.
wouldn't be able to imagine like where what the moves I would do,
Mm-hmm.
because unless I'd really studied through, and I mean, some people do this with flash climbing. I don't know if you heard this phrase, but it's when you have information
Mm-hmm.
about, which is kind of what you're doing really. So you're flashing the descent rather than on
Mm-hmm.
sighting because you are seeing it and you're getting some information
Yeah,
about
you're
it.
right. It's more like flash climbing.
Um, but yeah, like so when you're going down that run, you've like visualized this run a bunch of times. But like, what if you get there and like how you visualize landing, it's like a way bigger jump, or the snowpack's way different, or like there's a rock
Mm-hmm.
where you didn't visualize there being a rock. Like, how do you then manage that when it doesn't meet the visualization?
Mm-hmm. So I need to say, like, without visualizing, it's literally, it would be life threatening to do these lines. Like it doesn't work. You can't just be like, I'm gonna wing it.
Wow.
Literally life threatening. You really need to plan it out. Um, so that happens, that sometimes your visualization doesn't 100% match with reality. It could also be because there were people who skied the line, like competitors or skiing the line ahead of you, and now there's maybe a big hole in the landing from where
Right,
people have
yeah.
been landing. But it doesn't, like, it's, if you did your homework, it's not going to vary so wildly that it completely throws you off and you're
Right.
able to react instinctively. I mean, if
Okay.
there really is a rock right there, then hopefully you've jumped fast enough so you'll clear the rock. Like otherwise, if you're landing on the rock, I mean, that kind of sucks. Like, or otherwise you have to be like, okay, maybe if I spread my legs a bit, maybe I'll be able to land left and right of the rock. But basically what you're doing is you're able to react instinctively in the moment. You don't have time to think. It's
Yeah.
instinctual. It's like where your subconscious is just so much faster than, cognitive thought. And um but I've never had like situations where, like, even if it is a lot higher than what you visualized, if you visualize the direction correctly, of where you want to take off. And
Mm,
well, so it's a little bit higher, but you'll be all
yeah,
right.
okay. Yeah,
You're going to be
right.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice, interesting. Um, okay. What about letting go? So obviously like you're visualizing and you know you want to be in control. That's like one of the things you're judged on.
Mm-hmm.
But like how do you not like over control the performance? How do you
Mm-hmm.
kind of like let go into the effort of it? And like I don't know if you've seen that film Black Swan about the
Yes,
ballet dancer.
I have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that's what that film is all about, right? Is like she's like perfect, but she's like too perfect because she never lets go into the music. And
Mm-hmm.
she's always like trying to control her movement too much. Um, how much do you think about that and like how much does it play into your performance and how do you balance it all out?
Yeah, it's a huge thing. So it's fascinating because leading up to the event, it's very much a cognitive thing. We just spoke about visualization. That's a hugely cognitive mental activity, where you need your analytical part of the brain. You're analyzing, you're thinking about how high is this cliff, like what direction do I need to jump in, where am I going to land, like how much space do I have after to slow down, blah, blah, blah. So you have all this cognitive activity, you do all your visualization stuff, you hike up to the start, you're managing your energy and attention. At like when you're in the start gate, that's when you don't want to be analyzing anymore and thinking about your line. You want to actually enter your body. That's where you need to go from being in your thoughts and analyzing to being in your body so that you can be present. So I had my own ritual that I would do. I would like do certain movements and focus my attention on the feeling of those movements. Of course, focusing your attention on your breath is amazing because your body's always in the now and breathing. So if you focus your attention on breathing, you have an automatic anchor for being in the now. I would look out at the beautiful view and basically just through my um, through a couple of things like sight and hearing and feeling through my senses is what I wanted to say. I would anchor myself in the now. So I would usually use what is it that I can see, what is it that I can hear and feel, and really like manage what I'm looking at and manage what I'm listening to. So if I'm, for example, having a conversation with a competitor who's super stressed and he's like, oh my God, the conditions are so shit. And I can't believe they're making us compete. And it's so icy. And, that you basically you can tell them, look, sorry, I don't want to talk about this right now. Or you just remove yourself from that conversation. So controlling what it is that you're hearing, but also controlling what it is that you're looking at. So if you're, for example, looking at a competitor who you really admire and you're seeing her like warming up and looking really strong and you're starting to feel, oh, this is making me nervous, I look away.
Mm-hmm.
So through your senses, you can bring your attention to the now, which is where it needs to be able to perform in the moment. So you really have to get to a point, and at the latest in the start gate, because you're about to start, you're not going to change your line anymore now. You need to get to a point where you stop the whole cognitive, analytical activity and you start feeling into your body. And that's the letting go part, because the body is the professional athlete. The body has its blueprint because I did all the visualization, so my body knows exactly what to do. My body doesn't need to be told how to move your legs and everything, like it's automated. And
Mm-hmm.
so I want the body to be in charge and not my mind. And it's a letting go, exactly like you say, of trusting the body, trusting your preparation, and like, okay, I'm just going to let go now. And I know that I've prepared, and all I have to do now is just be, get into the action. And I do agree with you that with skiing, that might be easier because then when you're dropping in the line, you've got gravity and, you know, things are going fast. It's definitely going to draw your attention. Like, you're not going to be thinking about what is it that I'm cooking for dinner tonight, because it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it looks pretty exciting. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I really love what you said. It's like it's your body that's the pro athlete. It's interesting when you actually get into like the philosophy of that, though, isn't it? Or the philosophy of psychology of it, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not really your body, is it? Because if you died, your body wouldn't just start skiing away. It's still your mind, but it's I guess what we when we say that, it's like it's our subconscious mind, isn't it? Um it's not our kind of analyzing self-driven
Mm-hmm.
mind, I suppose, isn't it? It's like, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what it feels like when we're in flow, when we perform our best. It feels sort of selfless, doesn't it? It's like all of that chatter, like the me chatter with like Hazel's voice and da 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 da, that completely falls away. And it does
Mm-hmm.
kind of feel like your body's just doing what it knows how to do. um, but it is obviously still your mind. Your mind is still the thing that moves your body, your whole nervous system.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
quite
Mm-hmm.
interesting when you think about the words of it, but I know exactly what you mean.
Mm-hmm. I think I know what you're getting at. Of course, I guess it's what I'm talking about is where I now want to place my attention. So instead of placing my attention on my thoughts, I'm placing my attention on what it is that I'm doing in the moment, which is what I mean with my body.
Yeah.
So whether that's breathing, whether that's like going through my pre-performance routine of like stamping my feet and clicking my poles and swaying my hips, or whatever it is that you do, chalking up, or, you know, your routine, you can choose to place your attention on those things instead of on your thoughts. We don't want to be placing our attention on our thoughts anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. Um, Love it. Okay, final thing. It sounds like, from your story, like it was your psychology that enabled you to win this World Cup,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was the focusing on mastering your mind in the moment when you drop in. That was the thing that made the difference. Like,
It was
why
the
do you
last puzzle piece. Yes.
right,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It
Yeah.
was. Mm-hmm.
And obviously everything else was just as important, right? Like all of the
Mm-hmm.
practice you'd put in, all your physical training, all of that. But why do you think that like psychology in sport is so neglected? Like, as far as I know, like most pro climbers do not work with a coach or a sports psychologist when it comes to their
Mm-hmm.
mindset and how they're using their attention in the moment. Yeah, so like, yeah, why do you think it is neglected, and what can we do to kind of bring more awareness to the benefits of focusing on psychology?
I don't know for sure why it's neglected, but I have a good idea, I think. From what I've read in studies, coaches understand that the mental game is super important for the performance of their athletes, but they don't know how to teach it. They don't know how to convey to their athletes how to be mentally tougher or stronger, how to deal with situations in a mental aspect. So I think maybe that's why we focus on more tangible things, like physical training, gear, technique, even competition strategy, uh, nutrition, as opposed to these more diffuse, heart like intangible things
Mm.
that go on in our heads. And yeah, I think that's probably a big reason. And I agree. I think it is massively neglected. And it was the same with, if I look at my own progression, I covered all my other bases first. First it was like gear, physical training, technique, those things are fairly straightforward and easy to work on a lot of the time. and it's what everyone works on. And then for me also, the last puzzle piece was this mental piece that is so exciting though, because the potential that lies in there is so vast and so much bigger than some other areas, especially
Mm.
in free riding. Like nutrition isn't that big a deal as compared to some endurance sports, where nutrition really
Mm.
is a big deal. um yeah, the whole mental side, and I imagine in climbing it's very similar, that it opens so many doors to achieving completely different levels of performance without having to be stronger physically at all. It's really
Yeah.
exciting. So yeah, I think because it's intangible and a lot of coaches don't, they, although they recognize it's important, but they don't know how to convey it, how to teach it. I think that's why it's neglected.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's just so hard to talk about, isn't it? I mean, we just
Mm-hmm.
like you can't compare internal states of mind, and we can't put
Mm-hmm.
words to them in the same way that we can put words to, like, you know, how many pull-ups you can do. Like it's just
Yeah.
really easy to count the number of pull-ups. But that's why I'm so drawn to it, honestly. Like I like messy things. I like
Mm-hmm.
all the gray areas and like digging in there and like working stuff out, and there have being unknowns to it. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
why I'm actually so interested in it, is because it of all of those things. But I also see as well that lots of people don't like that messiness about it, and that's why they try and stay clear. Um, but yeah, I agree with you. And what sort of work are you doing in skiing? Maybe we could just finish with that, because I know that you are doing a lot of coaching, and you're coaching and with with these psychological tools, and it would just be interesting to hear about your experience of that.
Yeah. So I actually went back to university in 2015 to study mental strength coaching. Ended up with this really cool uni degree, a master's of mental strength coaching. And so next to like putting my knowledge into my camps for freeride skiers and ski touring skiers, I'm also coaching people on a one-to-one basis that has nothing to do with skiing at all, but usually people who are high performers and who are very ambitious and basically have similar challenges to what I was up against. But yeah, this aspect of drilling down more on the whole mental aspect of skiing is something that is not really being done in the
Mm.
skiing world. I don't know what's like in the climbing world. I could imagine you're also one of the few people who are really active in that area. But in future, I want to combine the whole personal development aspect, basically, or mental aspect, with skiing a lot more in future.
Yeah.
And I have to say, like I have this like mission, and I think you were talking about this a bit earlier, to help women feel more confident in their abilities,
Mm.
because I think that women undersell themselves generally. Like it's a generalization, but I'm putting it out there. I've through all the years of my coaching and guiding, I it's just always been confirmed to me again and again that women really undersell themselves and are often putting themselves under too much pressure to do everything perfectly. Whereas men are more like, I'll manage somehow, like whatever this situation brings, I'll kind of get through it. Women are like, oh, I don't think I can do it. And so they block themselves from certain opportunities. They say no to that trip, or they say no to skiing
Mm.
with this group because they're afraid that they're not going to be good enough and that they'll hold other people up. Like they really think a lot about that. Like, oh, I don't want other people to wait for me, which is kind of like a social fear in a way. They're much more cognizant of other people, would hate anyone to wait for them. But it's a shame that they're blocking themselves from these challenges, because it's where they would probably really grow a lot from and learn a lot from and improve. So yeah, I think offering camps where women can also learn how to manage their confidence, for example, stuff that we've been talking about in like on the stage of the mountain and skiing is ideal.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I like that a lot. Um, cool. All right. Well, should we leave it there? It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Learned so much, and yeah, it'd be great to do it again sometime as well.
Yeah, Hazel, thank you for having me. I've had a lot of fun. I know we could keep going, but I think there's been a lot in there. And yeah, who knows? Maybe we do a follow-up interview. You can get some cool questions from your audience, and maybe we can delve
Yeah,
into those.
that would be great. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hazel. Bye.